When my mum and dad argued when I was a kid, it really annoyed me. It really upset me because when you're younger, you just don't understand. And I think it's better. I think it was better if they. I'd always think, why couldn't they argue when I wasn't around completely? You know, when I wasn't in the house. Thinking back, because you could still hear them, and hearing them is even worse than being there, I think.
It's like I tried telling them to stop it, but I felt like no one was listening to me. And then my mum said, it's our business. So I just left it and got angrier and angrier.
When they argued, I used to feel like kind of upset, and I used to like just tell them to stop. And then like they sometimes did, but like they're fine now. They don't argue because they're like not together.
They just stopped finally, and then I was like, well, what's happened? And then I asked my mum, and she's like, well, we've come to a conclusion of let's just stop it because we can tell it's affecting you and your little sisters and your brother.
The impact of arguing is varied. So I think that firstly, it creates conflict in your own life as well, because you, at such a young age, you're learning from the people around you. You're taking everything that's happening, and that had an impact from day one. I would say the relationship between me and particularly my dad, because I was seeing him arguing with my mum, who I was still living with at the time. So sometimes, you know, he was shown in a much more negative light than my mother was. But crucially as well, what I learned from that is sometimes you need the diplomacy when you argue, because when you argue, you don't listen. And when you listen, then you start to talk, and that's when you really start solving things. So I guess those three things.
Sometimes it felt for me when my mum and dad weren't getting along that it was better that for me that if they weren't together at all, because it was easier and you knew where you stood. You knew where you stood you knew where they stood when they weren't together, because at least then they weren't arguing, and you didn't have to tell them to shut up or whatever.
The best thing is if you are arguing, which you will be, try and keep it away from the children if you can, because although actually it's healthy for them to maybe hear one or two, they don't need to hear it every day, and they particularly don't need to hear arguments that involve them some way or another, because that then passes blame onto that particular child.
Don't argue because it's going to affect your children, and just try and get on with each other, because if you don't, then it's going to affect your kids, their school life, and then when they get older they're going to have more anger issues, and they're going to have no one to talk to and they'll feel isolated.